But at the end of the day, the thing that matters is the amount of work that you have to have a person doing.
Welcome to This Is Fine, the podcast by Hunter Strategy, where we look into the latest in technology, national security, and all things nerdy. I'm your host, Matt Triner. Today, we're venturing into the cutting-edge world of artificial intelligence, specifically focusing on GPT and other LLMs for cyber threat detection. In a time where cyber threats are increasingly sophisticated and pervasive, the role of AI is more crucial than ever. From predictive analytics to automating response systems, AI technologies are revolutionizing how we identify and combat cyber threats. Joining us today, we have two special guests, Matt DiVertola, the Applied AI Lead here at Hunter Strategy, and Andrew King, Chief Information Security Officer here at Hunter. Matt is at the forefront of integrating AI into practical, mission-driven solutions overall, while AJ is overseeing how AI applies to security solutions provided by Hunter. With their expertise in applied AI and security, they are both here to help us unpack how these technologies are transforming cyber threat detection, what this means for the future of cybersecurity, and the challenges we face in this dynamic field. Whether you're a cybersecurity professional, someone interested in AI, or just an overall tech enthusiast, this episode promises to provide valuable insights into one of the most critical aspects of technology today. Let's dive in. Welcome, Matt and AJ.
Thanks for having me.
In your experience, what distinguishes GPT and LLM technologies from traditional approaches to detecting cyber threats?
I think detecting cyber threats versus traditionally, right? I think in the traditional sense, if we think back to the starting days of, AV, and it was all signature based, it was file based, it was looking for specific attributes, and if those specific attributes matched up, right, effectively it was looking at a wanted poster and being like, do you match? If they didn't have a wanted poster, then the person walked through just fine. Whereas on the AI GPT side of the house, you now have the ability to take in, and I think you said this yesterday in a different conversation, Matt. It was while we were talking to GovCon. And it was like AI reads for comprehension. Humans do not. And so to me, the difference in detection is it allows it facilitates a very junior person being able to do some really advanced things fairly quickly by giving them tool sets, right? One of the examples that I like to make is there's a rifle that's produced and a scope that's with it. The scope will literally tell you based off of windage and yardage and everything, all you have to do is raise it until it beeps, and you basically wait till it beeps and you pull the trigger. It hits the target and we're talking 1,000 yards away. Someone that's never shot a gun before, they handed this rifle to this person, right? And it's just a force multiplier to me that takes away a lot of the toil and speed to actually determine if something is viable threat or not. That's, I would say, probably my 30,000 foot take on the differences.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. If you kind of look at it through the lens of strictly kind of GPT and LLM, kind of more of the chat modality, you can take a pretty junior person, load up a whole bunch of documents into a GPT and give them something to ask a ton of questions about, which I think is massively useful. It's taking Splunk as an example. You could take a whole bunch of Splunk docs, drop them into a GPT, and then right there you have somebody who can just kind of side by side find a whole bunch of things, detect anomalies, things like that in ways that they probably wouldn't have been able to otherwise. I think most immediately, that's what will help the broader group. I think there's a lot of really interesting things that are maybe a little bit more in the research space right now of what we can do with embeddings and kind of deeper insights for detection to do kind of more novel detection mechanisms. So we might be getting a little too far out of the scope of GPT and LLMs with that kind of stuff.
So if you had some, I'm curious, Matt, a practical example, right, where I start thinking about things like looking through regex, right, or raw logs, or in a rapid fashion from an analyst perspective, they're looking at a bunch of logs, being able to build a helper or a series of helpers, each one of those helpers building upon the other to help give the insight necessary rapidly against a large amount of data is really where, to me, that sweet spot hits for AI in detection engineering specifically. I do think there's some losses, I would say, as well. I think it's going to be interesting from how I think AI is going to abstract away the knowledge to act. It's kind of like machine language and code and assembly. It abstracts away the base level understanding knowledge from some of the junior analysts. So while it will allow a junior analyst to very quickly become valuable to the organization because they can operate the things, at the end of the day, if you ask the analyst, why does this work? I think that there's also a big barrier there that will potentially cause problems in the future.
Yeah, I also think the way GPTs stand today, if we're talking about these little AI agents, are kind of like, well, it's not a perfect technical comparison. I think it's relatively close, where you have, like a AI agent, LLM agent, GPT agent, whatever you want to call them, are the container to like Kubernetes, where I think that kind of the next phase that we're going to see is people starting to orchestrate these GPTs programmatically. So like right now, a analyst would kind of be that orchestration kind of mechanism where it's
manual orchestration.
Exactly. We have logs across Sentinel, Splunk, and Security Onion. We need to go and like figure out how to write these queries across all three things. And a junior level analyst is going to need some sort of like help there to figure out how to write those queries across all three different mechanisms. But in the future, it's going to be, hey, we need to find these types of events across these three different tools that we use for our log ingestion. And we're going to give API keys to these agents, and those agents are just going to go fan out, make all the queries, and roll themselves back up into one. So I think that's where things get really exciting. And I think that's definitely more on the upper kind of outer bound, bleeding edge, whatever you want to call it, of what people are doing. But I see that as being kind of the next evolution of what we're going to see with a lot of this stuff.
I would agree. And so I think some of what you're saying is those detection engineering roles in the future, you're going to have to know how prompting works and how LLMs work and how assistants work and how you string all those together and programmatically use them in order to truly keep up pace in the future.
Yeah. And your output, response time, everything like that per engineer is going to be significantly improved across the board.
Yeah, no, I would agree. So, as we continue to talk about AI and Hunter strategy, and we talk about some of the ways in which Hunter wants to start using AI in our practice specific to detection in other areas, let's talk about some practical kind of real applications of some of these technologies and how we're looking to apply them. I wouldn't say this is specific to detection. It's more on I would say the vCISO compliance side of the house, but one of the biggest things, and we mentioned it earlier in the show, right, was LLMs read for comprehension. One of the toughest jobs, and I loved your example yesterday, Matt, which is, you're a director of GRC or you're responsible for policy in some way, or you're an auditor. And you have to go and audit these things, and you have to understand the differences, the nuances against a bunch of frameworks that are out there, as well as internal policy sets. And so you start talking about practical applications that personally I think are going to disrupt the GRC space very quickly. I mean, think about it from this perspective. If you are a CISO, and I can say, hey, here is a SaaS platform. In other cases, right, we've got friends, Mick Douglas, right, that has built Concierge. There's other platforms that are out there that are completely offline if you don't need to be connected. But I can hand them and say, okay, you now have a tool where you can load in, you can point all of your policies in a single directory. You can ingest everything. You can set up frameworks, and you can now set automated questions against those frameworks that you've previously defined. And literally in the scope of a few minutes, right? Review all of those things and have a report spit out to you of the areas where you should highlight, look where things are missing. And if you think about this audit year over year as well, you can say, okay, this was last year. Are there differences? Are there improvements over last year? And so I think it's going to be a huge force multiplier in the GRC space. I think it's extremely low bar. When you start thinking about detection engineering and all the moving parts and pieces that are in there today, it's going to take a lot longer to disrupt that, I think it's going to come incrementally. That is one way where Hunter is looking to say, hey, how can we provide more value more rapidly to our clients is by using tools like this to give analysis and comprehension that a human can't. I'm curious, Matt, from your perspective, when you start thinking about things like your experience in AWS, what are some practical applications or things along those lines that like you would use LLMs for?
I think that most immediately, when I'm doing hands-on technical programming work, things like that, my first thing is always GPT, like always.
Like when you say you're doing hands-on technical programming, your first thing is GPT. What do you mean?
So let's say I'm spinning up an ECS cluster in AWS using the CDK as my infrastructure as code tool. and I'm trying to get an EFS mounted to the containers that are in there. I deploy the containers with CDK, something breaks. I'm like, what's going on here? Like, okay, this is a weird error. I can literally take that code snippet that I used to deploy the cluster, define the container, and attach the mount point, drop like maybe that 25 lines of code directly into GPT and go, hey, this is the code that I used to deploy it. Here's the error that I got. What do you think's going on? And GPT will usually spit out, here's your fixed code and here's why. And it'll say, oh, you need to figure out your group and user IDs for your mount. And like, once you do that, you should be good. Copy, paste it, drop it into the code, redeploy it. And a lot of the time it works. Sometimes it doesn't. I've built specifically just because it's what I do so much of. I've built my own GPTs where I've loaded in like the latest CDK documents and things like that. So it's referencing all of those and it's getting kind of the most up-to-date and accurate stuff. But I think like that's something that like, it's something I know really well, and it saves me a few minutes, because otherwise I'd probably have to hit Google, see what that error code is. And I'd probably end up coming to that conclusion in maybe 15 minutes instead of 2, but that's a huge time saver for me. I also think that there's a huge win for people who might not be as into the space or as like used to using those tools, and it can take somebody who is non-technical / like moderately technical and create an expert out of them in a very, very quick amount of time. Because if you generally know that...
No, keep going. I would just argue with you on the expert side. I think informed and operating versus actual expert. So I think it allows more junior people to become proficient more quickly into the role that they are supposed to be fulfilling and provide value. But that's a little bit of what I was talking about earlier. They produce output like an expert because they have this AI, but they're not actually experts. And I just think that we have to watch that as we continue to grow. That was
just to cut in here. This is where something I talk about a lot, which is automated versus automatic. And something that's automated is an assistance tool. It's a helpful thing, but it is to help a person that knows how to do a thing do it faster, and also has the effective safeguards or the person that is operating the automated thing. Whereas something that is automatic is like level 3 self-driving. It's like truly not supposed to have any human intervention or supervision. Both are valid things, but they have different maturity required to achieve them.
Yep.
And an example just from the other day, and this is not cyber specific, but it would be very related to that, is if I were to want to drop in, hey, here's a bunch of email threats, or here's a bunch of things, do you think this is real or not, right? That's a very good thing that AI can do when you have a downward pressure on how many SOC analysts you support per customer. So this is a way to make your SOC analysts more powerful. The example I'll give is more of an internal thing, because at Hunter, we're trying to figure out how to share more information among our PMs and our people, and we're trying to redact sensitive financial information that those people don't need. So I had somebody that I work with that was just manually redacting it, and I was like, hey, give me the whole thing, I'm curious. And I threw it into GPT, and I said, please redact the financial information. And it came back and it had exactly the paragraph where the pricing and the POCs and the payment terms were there. And it said, please download here for the other one. And I'm like, oh, cool, this is perfect. I hit download, sent it back to the same person who was doing it manually. And I'm like, I'm multitasking, just tell me if this worked. And he's like, this is the same PDF that I sent you. So like, it was like a major fail on GPT's side in some type of connectivity, because it knew what I wanted. It told me what it was going to redact, but then some Python it generated to do the redaction just did not do it. And so that's kind of it. Is it an automated tool that was by and large still helpful in identifying the part of the document? Absolutely. Is it a good thing that I didn't trust it inherently and I made another person? I would have validated it myself. I was just doing 4 things at once, but I made somebody else validate it. Yeah, if I didn't do that, it would have defeated the entire purpose of the sensitivity exercise.
But I do think that's a great example. I do think that's a great example where you've proven, right, that GPT can identify and do the thing, and now it's just fixing the operationalization of the output. And I literally was sitting, as you were describing this, in some of my past and working in the Fortune 100 financial services space, SOAR, right, security orchestration and automated response, and SOAR platforms are very expensive and are high entry points, take a lot of understanding and skill to deploy. And I'm not saying that GPT replaces those, but for the cost of $50 a month, you can have a private Teams-based instance in ChatGPT, and you can do a lot with that if you understand how to use it, right? Building helpers and been building, to be honest with you, a lot of SOAR elements into a GPT style interface. So to your point, there does still have to be quality, but if you think about this from so Microsoft Zap, right, in Defender for Office 365, that's effectively what it's doing, Matt. It is the automatic version of once you click report, it goes and does some form of analysis, and then it pulls that from everyone's mailbox in the organization if it sees it, right? So that's an example of something like that is a force multiplier for your analysts. So as I start thinking about ways that we can operationalize and using this in detection engineering, right, and to your point, force multiply your analysts to stop doing toil. That's ultimately what the goal is.
Well, so let me ask a follow-up question there, and this is for both of you because you both have very different views of the world, right? With Matt coming from a very AI-centric background and a master's in AI and a lot more trust for AI than I personally have in many cases for getting the job done. And AJ, you've been there investing in these automated tools. So I'll ask the question abstractly on purpose. How many times do you do an automated thing before you're kind of like, you know what? It could be automatic now. Like, how many times do you need to do it before a human gets pulled from the loop? What is that trust ratio? Because for me, I'll tell you from that example with the financial document, it's going to be quite a number of times that I want somebody to review it before I'm letting AI redact my documents for me because it made that mistake. Even if I figured out why it happened and I fixed it, there's going to be in the N order of a couple of dozen times where I want to either check it myself or see the thumbs up from a human that I trust. And again, I'm not saying 15, 35, I'm not looking for a discrete number. That particular thing now is on the N order of dozen to dozens of times that I want to see it works before I'm comfortable either taking the human out of the loop or reducing the human to be less of a SME in the loop, right? Because I think there's two ways to look at it is to your point, you can upskill SMEs and make them much faster. You can make non-SMEs behave like SMEs because they're just copy pastaing AI responses. But the peril there is when they copy pasta an AI response, it's wrong. And then a customer goes, can you please say that again? And then they confidently just read the GPT thing again, and you've lost customer confidence. I've lost AI confidence. And the person that's regurgitating it doesn't even know they did anything wrong necessarily. So what do you guys think about when it comes to gaining that level of comfort?
So there's two things for me. One, in this particular instance, I would be writing a secondary helper that is going and looking for QA and specifically looking for financial terms, right? You're literally just saying, take this document that has been uploaded and look for financial terms. If there are any financial terms in this document, fail this audit. Then once you have that in place, now you have a human that's like, oh, this is failing. Why is this failing, right? So to me, that is another abstraction away from toil. So that would be number one in this case. Number two would be, I don't think, and you alluded to this, right? There isn't a static number that's out there. It's going to depend, to me, and it absolutely should depend on risk, right? It should be risk-based. What is the thing that you're doing, and what is the impact if it breaks? Again, that's why I said from a detection engineering perspective, I love it, the automatic versus automated, it's going to need quite a bit of verification, right, before it really gets to that fully automatic state. So for me, it's very much a risk-based conversation. I'm a huge automation, power automate process workflow guy as well. And so I spend the time up front, right, to go through and define the process. I'm going to say it on this podcast because I say it all the time. People, process, and technology in that order for a reason. So if you're trying to add AI to your process that you don't actually have understanding about, you don't have it documented today, it's just going to make it more muddy. So for me, I get what you're saying, but to me, it's just risk-based decisioning. It would just be, if this is super critical and I lose money, if it fails, right, then I probably would have 100% check or something along those lines. I don't know what your thoughts are, Matt, but that's me.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think there's no matter, for sure, don't automate a process unless you really know it inside and out. And also some processes should always have a human check no matter who's doing it. I 100% aligned on all of that stuff. I think there's some stuff you can do to make the process more reliable, I guess is a good way of putting it. But generally the inherent issue is that there's no if statements here. There's no if contains, a dollar sign and a comma in the middle to identify that it's six figures of money. It's just kind of based on the inherent understanding of the AI. What I've found is being kind of helpful is you can force JSON outputs of these things. And if you can force a standardized output, then you might be able to go backfill and put those if statements in there to check to see some sort of kind of like truly quantitative output you could get of a certainty level or what was removed and things like that. So I think doing some sort of kind of combo there where you're using AI to do something where it's like, here's a document that has a bunch of sensitive information, output a JSON object of everything that you're removing. And if you know that there are like a certain amount of things in that document that need to be removed, you can check to see how long that array that it outputs is to see everything removed. So I think there's some kind of like automated checks you could do that way. I think like forcing of JSON output or standardized output might be kind of the best way around it. But I still think inherently there's a lot of things that like will always need human approval or should always have human approval.
Or will for a long period of time, right? Until it's so normalized in the world that it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there are a couple things there. People are going to start trusting that, oh, it was an AI mistake and that happens sometimes. People already do that with voice to text, right? There's like existing solutions in AI where they've been around long enough where like when you send a really funky text message to somebody, they're like, oh, that was either probably an AI-based autocorrect or a voice to text that misinterpreted your voice. And that's going to be the assumption on the other side. So I do think that's an important thing to talk about. Even in the concept of cyber risk, right? We have customers that today are expecting a certain amount of closure rates and a certain amount of accuracy. But with AI and with automation, people are going to expect faster response rates and faster closure rates because AI is going to drive that. But with that will go up false positives and false negatives. And until that kind of seesaw of the world of normalizing that automation kind of gets all the way to the customers, as a small provider that focuses on excellence, I don't want to be the first one to be like, whoops, AI did that, sorry. But if the whole industry is doing that and I'm the only one that's going slow, I'm going to get crushed by my competition before I ever get to make that apology. I like what I heard about fully out of band automated ways to check the output of automated processes. I think that's an interesting risk mitigation overall. Because we're not saying, okay, hey, GPT, do this thing, tell me if this event in Splunk is really the event that it says it is, and I should be quarantining the entire subnet and everything else associated with this. And it goes, yep. And then you're like, are you sure, effectively, right? And it's not going to a third-party system. That's scary to me because I've seen AI double down on hallucinations more than once. The example I like to give is a famous Twitter personality named Corey Quinn who likes to futz with various LLMs, and he can usually get them all to rank the presidents by order of viscosity. And it's hysterical because first the LLM is like, no, that makes no sense. And he's like, right, but theoretically, if they could be viscous, and like, he just like convinces the LLM to like do what he wants. And then it's hilarious because it'll like give like he's had enough of a conversation with it where he's convinced this instance of the LLM that this is a perfectly reasonable question, and then it will defend its ranking as to why Barack Obama is more viscous than Donald Trump. And it's like, it's hysterical, but that's why I use the word out of band, because like if there's a way, you mentioned JSON output for something less ridiculous, there's lots of different, it all depends on the problem, but having something that's more machine logic versus AI that is the check on the LLM makes a lot of sense to me. And that's a good way to continue the speed and move the human to the reviewer of the reviews, so to speak, and just kind of iteratively move the human further and further from the interior of the loop.
In that same aspect, Matt, you talk about in the military, they call them backstops, which is where effectively if you get off track, there's a marker that shows you that you're off track. And so you think about log analysis and to your point, hey, there's this huge event, Splunk wants to do something, and you just inject the human approval into the action loop where you're just like, here's all the analysis, use an API call and fire it into Microsoft Teams for approval to a senior, lead that's going to take all the summarized data that the AI pulled together, read through it and say, yes, go ahead and perform the action, or no, this is a false positive, or I need to go research more, right? And that yes or no click by the analyst If they click yes, it is now going and doing a bunch of automated activities, right, to resolve the thing. But the analyst still has that, break glass basically in the middle until both analyst skills are updated, confidence in AI grows, all of the things get, like you said, there's a great pause break spot in there. That's what I would be looking to do. Use the APIs to call a Power Automate approval into Teams and tell them, is this, here's all the stuff, go review it, click yes. Now I'm really curious, by the way, MD, like, I wonder how much of a SOAR we could build into ChatGPT using API calls and Power Automate. Like, I bet you we could do a lot.
Circling back to that container analogy, but like if you view like these little assistants as just little containers that you can go and deploy to kind of take any input and output anything you want, I've seen some pretty cool stuff happen. I really do think the JSON output is huge too, because it just makes it super easy to do. Kind of like an API for anything type deal.
I would agree.
As we wrap up here, as AI becomes more ubiquitous, what metrics do you look towards to see that your AI solutions and your AI approaches are in fact being impactful? And like, obviously, mean time to response and like all those basic ones are, I'd say those are table stakes. What would be an innovative metric, I guess, is the better question. What would be a metric that takes into account all the nuance of the concerns and of the checks and all the things that we've talked about? How do you measure that?
I'm going to introduce a new metric. It's called MTT, mean toil time. Because if you think about it, right, like to me, the mean time to respond, sure, is nice, right? But you can just be like, okay, that goes down to a few seconds because now they're acknowledging the alert and AI is processing it. But at the end of the day, the thing that matters is the amount of work that you have to have a person doing. So when we track on our metric side, we track how much work, literally how much time in hours it takes to resolve a ticket. And we can say, hey, we did 400 reviews last quarter and it had 136 hours. So for me, the metric there is, can I keep that number of incidents the same while dropping that number of hours of labor? Because that now is a hard metric that says my analysts are being more effective while maintaining the same level of quality.
It's an interesting one because I look at that as similar to why I use GPT to help me write blog posts or contracts.
And
right?
that was going to be my response, was for me personally, is the number of quality written pieces that I can produce. I am not a writer. And so the ability to tell ChatGPT, and Matt, you're helping me grow through this, is like prompt and help me build a framework that I can now speak against, right, and get my thoughts out on paper when that's just not a skill set that I produce. That's a huge metric for me, is the ability to do that. And that is one that has helped me lean into AI and get better there. But in the security world, for detection purposes, that's what I would say. And honestly, the same thing across the board, right? Like, I want my GRC analysts, I don't want them reading policy documents. I want them using their knowledge of frameworks and decisions and risk management to take the policy documents and help drive things forward. So to me, that's the metric, is toil time.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. In like my day-to-day, that's absolutely, all right, time to crack open the Terraform docs or the AWS docs and like dig in. And it's like, if I can spend 2 seconds getting that from GPT, then takes that mean toil time down significantly.
100%. New metric, MTT, mean toil time.
I like it. I see a blog post in your future.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good call. We'll have to feed it through that GPT prompt that Matt's building for blog posts from podcast recordings.
Exactly. Well, gentlemen, thank you both for your time. This has been a great discussion, and until next time.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.